Let's make stunning landscapes in Blender. Start with a new project, go to the add-ons and enable A.N.T landscape. Go to add, mesh and click landscape to add your object. You can choose any preset and change the settings according to your wish. I went ahead with a lake. You can see my shot up here which shows the A.N.T landscape add-on in detail. I adjusted the noise scale and position for the lake and then sculpted the parts that were sticking out of the water surface. Then I extended the corners of the ground plane and added loop cuts. I added a displace modifier at a low strength to get uniform displacement over the entire new ground plane. You can also change the noise texture if you wish. Then I added a cube and placed it in the scene for scale. Now it's time to add a camera. Add a camera with Shift A and frame it according to your composition. You can change the focal length and also use composition guides in the camera settings below. Once I was happy with the camera, I added an HDRI to visualize the scene better. Switch to cycles and GPU compute. Blender Kit has amazing materials, HDRIs, models and many of them are free, so definitely check them out. After adding the HDRI, you can hop into shader editor and switch to world view to change the settings of the HDRI, rotate it, scale it, etc. Let's add foliage to our landscape now. I'm using the amazing plant assets from Blender Market. They're absolutely free and I'm including a link in the description. You'll find all kinds of grass, plants, bushes, shrubs, etc. to include in your nature scenes. I brought in a simple grass asset and used the decimate modifier since we are going to be scattering it a lot. For scattering, I'm using Gscatter. It's an amazing free add-on that lets you choose an emitter as your surface and you can scatter all types of different systems on it. By default, it scatters the objects over the entire plane. So just come down to distribution, add in a weight mask, and then you can go into weight paint to paint the areas where you want your foliage to show up. You can also create different vertex groups and paint different areas when you're scattering different foliage systems. I first marked the bounds on the camera and then only painted inside it to save computing power. I used different weights to paint in different areas to give us variation in the foliage. Now you can just select the newly created vertex group in the weight mask of Gscatter and you'll get your plants scattered only in the specific areas you've painted. There are a lot of settings in the Gscatter add-on to change distribution, scale, rotation and geometry. You can add noise textures and other types of textures to control the scale distribution, which gives a very nice variation. You can add random rotation, random scales to make it look more natural. My favorite effect is in the rotation panel. Add a wind effect to simulate the plants moving as if wind is blowing over. There's only geometry nodes involved and no physical simulation being done, so it's very light on your system. You can change the viewport display in Gscatter to make your viewport performance smoother. You can also change the wind scale strength depending on how much movement you want in your plants. I added many different foliage systems, grass of different lengths, shrubs, plants, flowers, etc. and scattered them. Add noise textures in the distribution and scale to get a more natural distribution of your foliage. I downloaded a wet ground material from Blender Kit and applied to the ground plane and scaled it to fit my scene. We're starting to get somewhere, but it still looks very uniform, so let's break that up. I painted different weight maps for different vertex groups and used them to scatter different systems across my ground plane. Take time with the weight painting. Look at a lot of natural references. The more variation you have, the more real it will seem. Add randomness and variation in scale, distribution, rotation, etc. I also changed the HDRI because the previous one was looking dull. Let's make some trees with Sapling Tree Gen. If you don't know about this plugin, watch my video up here to know all about how to make animated trees in Blender. I chose a Japanese maple preset and adjusted it until I got a tree that looks good. You can even add an armature and add wind effects to animate the trees. I think it looks pretty good for a free plugin. Select the trunk object and convert it to a mesh for a smoother playback and position the tree in your scene. That's looking pretty good. Let's add materials to the tree. This is another non-sponsored shout out to Blender Kit. I use them all the time for my materials, models, free HDRIs, etc. If you're working to improve your 3D skills, then of course it matters to design and model everything. But if you're just looking to tell a story or make a scene or a cool render, then don't shy away from free assets and give proper credits. So I used the tree bark material from Blender Kit and I made a simple leaf material by using a PNG of a leaf and combining it with a translucent shader. This will not hold up for extreme close-up shots, but for an animated mid-ground tree, it's pretty good. I removed the grass around the tree base to make an area where people could sit, rest, have a campfire, etc. And I also added a volume scatter cube around the scene with a low density. I started populating the scene with more objects, such as some rocks, and then I thought there should be a castle in the background for it to be a medieval fantasy. But I didn't want to model a whole castle. So I heard about this AI called Rodin by Hyper 3D, and you can just put in your text and generate different images for your model, and when you're satisfied with it, you can just click on generate to get a 3D model of that same image. You can also generate PBR materials for the model and download them both. This is not sponsored as well, but I thought it was really cool to have a way to generate 3D models to use in the background for free. If you take the paid subscription, you also get access to higher poly models, free redos, and also more material generation features. I downloaded this castle model and brought it into my scene, positioned it far in the distance, and rotated it to match the composition. Let's make a new material for it, and Ctrl+Shift+click on the principal BSDF if you have the Node Wrangler enabled. Go to the directory and select all the texture maps, and Node Wrangler will set up the material automatically for you. It's very handy and saves a lot of time. Then I scaled up the volume cube to cover the entire scene including the castle. And I added some more free props around the scene. I weight painted around the props so that the foliage doesn't clip through it. Next, I added a plane and a particle system to simulate some fireflies. I reduced the gravity and increased the Brownian to get a random motion. Then I rendered the objects as small icospheres, very simple but effective. Realism is in the details, so I added more and more props until the scene was looking quite full. Also a final foliage layer of more flowers and tall grass. I found this amazing thing called fake trees on Blender Kit. They have different kinds available, and it's essentially just a plane with a tree and alpha, but it interacts with the lighting and HDRI and looks great from a distance. I populated my scene with quite a lot of fake trees to break up the background. I definitely went back into weight painting and adjusted the weights many times. I wanted natural variation in the foliage, and this was definitely the most time I've painted weights in any project till now. I wanted to add a simple tent in the background, so I modeled a simple frame using cylinders and then added a subdivided plane with cloth simulation to make an actual tent. Just very basic cloth simulation, quality 8, self collisions on. Then I modeled some rope pieces using Bezier curves and textured the model with materials from Blender Kit. Now it's time to add some human models into our scene. I wanted a group of bards playing music beside a lake at sunset, so I turned to Mixamo for this. I got a piano playing animation, applied it on a model, brought it into Blender, and adjusted the arm and wrist animation so that it looks like she's playing a harp. I turned auto keyframing on, selected only the wrist and the forearm bones, and adjusted the animation. This part was actually one of the most satisfying stages of this project. I found a guitar playing animation on Mixamo and thought it could be used to show a person playing a lute. I adjusted the overdrive and the trim in the settings to make the animation exactly 240 frames. That ensures that all my animations are looping. I got a lute model from Sketchfab and made a strap for it using Bezier curves. We have a harp and a lute. We definitely need a percussion player. So I brought in this guy from Mixamo, adjusted the animation to 240 frames and brought him in my project. I got some drums and positioned them in front of him. None of the animations are perfect, so we'll be looking at them from a distance. Finally, I brought in a knight and some guards who are maybe sitting and listening to the music. And now I rendered the scene in cycles and composited using After Effects. This render is actually a bardcore or medieval style cover of a song which is coming out on my music channel called Dissonance Studios. I'll include a link in the description if you want to check it out. Thank you for watching, subscribe, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below.